What is up, hustlers? Welcome back to the show. Today I have Roman Grigoriev, who's the founder and CEO of Splento, joining me on the show today. So Splento is a content marketing agency at its core. They provide videography services, they provide post-production services, and also retouching, anything you can name it. If it comes to visual content or video content, whatever you need, Splento has a solution for you. So in this episode, we actually talk a lot about fundraising, running a startup, the importance of a vision, a clear vision across your startup or organization, and how these things come together and make a successful startup. So guys, if you're into building new businesses, fundraising, you're looking to fundraise, I think this episode will be extremely helpful for you because Roman has a lot to share because he's got tons of experience in this space already. So guys, if you're interested to know more, please stay tuned to the end of this episode, okay? Hey Roman, glad to have you on the show today. So let's maybe start by saying hello and introducing yourself and what you do.
Hey, hi Jeremy, very good to meet you. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Splento, and we help businesses all around the world with their visual content, photography and videography.
Right. So can you tell me a little bit more about your experience before you got started with entrepreneurship? Like, what were you doing before that?
So I always was kind of an entrepreneurial mind, and even back in uni and in school was trying had some side hustles. But realistically, during uni days, I set up I think 2 different businesses. I realized I don't know much about business, and I needed to get a bit more corporate experience. So I went into property. So for 5 years, I worked for one of the largest estate agencies in the UK. Property agencies, but as a surveyor, property valuer. And as a side hustle, I had startups running in the background, experimenting with that. And so for 10 years, I was in property. So 5 years in a big company, then my own, but at the same time experimenting with tech startups. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I set up Splento.
Right. So what was the tipping point where, you decided, I'm done working in a corporate environment and I wanted to run the show right now? So what was the tipping point?
In reality, I always knew that it was going to happen. So it wasn't as if the tipping point. I had my 4 or 5 years in a corporate environment, and I thought I learned everything I needed to learn. So for me, it wasn't that I always planned to be a corporate and then something I got tired of it. It was I needed to understand how corporates work, but I always wanted to do my own thing. And the tipping point was like, look, it's 4 years now, it's 4 or 5 years. I've learned everything I wanted about corporate life. It's about time I go and set up on my own. So it was this kind of just time-wise rather than anything else.
Right. So thanks so much for sharing your experience. So I'm curious, as an entrepreneur, what motivates you and drives you forward? Like, what do you want to see happen?
For me, it's very simple. I love solving problems for people. So when I see loads of problems, I want to solve them. That's always been my driver. It's not, and of course, working with a great team is absolutely brilliant. Making money is wonderful. But for me, what gets me out of bed, I see loads of problems and I want to solve them. So it is about solving challenging problems.
Right. So Splento is one of them, I'm assuming.
As in Splento is not a problem, but it's a big solution to lots of other problems.
Right.
Splento was born out of a huge problem. Back in the property industry, back in the property days, I saw that visual content is very important, photography, videography, to help estate agents sell their properties. And there wasn't an easy way to source that. And so we started our business, but then we realized that there is much more. It's much bigger industry, developing really fast, and Splento evolved into much bigger thing than that. And property realistically is a very tiny share of what we do, property photography.
Right. So maybe let's go back to day one. of Splento? Like, how did it all get started? How did you launch? How did you get your first customers? Tell me more about that.
The important point, Jeremy, is that we pivoted a few times. So how we launched is very different from what we are now. So we had a few hypotheses. We had a few understanding that the market is broken, the market is inefficient, the market is way too expensive, and something needs to be changed. And we looked at learned as much as possible about the industry and went one niche after another. So initially we actually started, even though the problem was I saw that the visual content industry is broken from my property days, but the first trials we started doing were in tourist photography rather than property photography. Because back 5 years ago, we saw that there are 20 million tourists coming to London, and this issue isn't solved. So we had an interesting solution, but it didn't work out. So from that, we pivoted to another one. We did about 2-3 different pivots, 2 different changes. But yeah, it was a very methodical approach to what we're doing.
Right. So how did you validate your hypothesis? Like, how do you go out and run these experiments? Like can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So for me, it's important. So when it comes to business, I believe it starts not even with a problem, it starts with a team. So if you have the right team, then you can go and tackle right problems. So the business shouldn't start with an idea. It's nothing, even if you have the best idea, it's not going to get anywhere unless you have the best team to deliver it. And even if you have the best team to deliver, if you have the best idea and it's no one's problem, you're not going to build a big business out of it. So it always starts with a team. Then you find a problem, and then you need to find a solution. And that's the whole point with us. So first, I needed a great team, and so it took me a while to get a proper team together. And when we got the proper team together, then we started looking at different. So we knew that we wanted to be in the visual content industry. We knew that it's one of the largest. And in 5 years, it has been validated. I mean, a year, 1 trillion photos are being taken each year. 30% of them are going online, and that number is growing. 5 years ago, when we were starting, I think it's probably 500 million photos or 500 billion photos we're taking each year. So the number is growing. It's just doubling and growing faster and faster. So we knew we want to be in that industry. We knew that there are so many inefficiencies. But we started looking at niche by niche. So we had our plan, and then we started talking to customers in each niche, launching little MVPs to test whether it works or not. So it was a very methodical approach to what we're doing.
Right. So you mentioned about, assembling the correct team, the right capable team, right? So when you as a startup, you probably don't have any funding at the time, and you don't even have an idea yet, right? So how do you convince people to be part of your team?
That's the $1 million question. That's Jeremy. That is the best and the most difficult question. And yeah, you definitely don't have. I didn't have the fund. I mean, I had the funds and I put a lot of money into my company, but I didn't have the funds to afford the best team at the market salaries. And that's the biggest hustle of all. So you really need to figure it out, and that's where. The first step is really to understand what a good team is. Because if you don't know what a good team player, what a good team is, and whom you need, you will just attract wrong people. So you can do all these magical tricks of promising bright future and showing the the horizons. But if you're going after the wrong people, then it's useless. But if you know whom you need, then it's charm, it's showing the vision, and it has to be the vision. They have to share the vision where you're moving. And it rarely comes with money. You would never have enough money to attract the best possible talent. So it really, and it's a good filter, because if this great team is only attracted by money,
then it's not the best team.
No, it's not the best team. They have to share your passion. They have to share your vision, and you have to click. And ideally, you need to work somehow with them for a long enough time before you because it's going to be difficult. Startups, it's all about, not about solving problems not just about solving problems for your customers. It's about constant problems internally. And it's difficult. And if you don't know your co-founders, you don't know your team really well, and they can't stick with you through harsh times, it's going to be doubly so. Yeah.
Right. Thanks so much for sharing. But I would really like to dive in deeper because it seems that you have a lot of experience in this field. You're an excellent communicator. And so what are can you be a little bit more specific in terms of, like selling the vision? How you sell your vision, how do you come up with your vision, and how do you communicate this so that someone can resonate with you and, go through hard times with you? I think that's the right question to ask. Yeah.
So with that, I guess you can't. It's a difficult question. So great entrepreneurs have this vision, and it's the size of the vision that matters, and that's what gets attracted. So it's like a nucleus, and everything gets attracted to it. I'm not sure whether you probably can teach this, but it's just by experimenting. It's one of those questions are actually, if someone asks me, I can teach people, or I can share my experiences of how to attract great people, how to motivate them, how to build operational structures and processes. To be honest, one thing I cannot put across is how to get that vision. That's such a difficult. I seriously, and I read a lot of books. I probably go through 50 books a year, and loads of them are about all these elements, but none of them is about vision, because I don't think anyone has ever figured out a way of how to create a vision and how to sell it. Because I don't know, with me, I just had it. We knew that the world is moving online. So if you take the world 50 years ago, or even 10 years ago, everything was mostly offline. And we knew that the world is going online. And if something is going online, it has to be visualized. Whatever you do, we don't interact with something online if it's not visual, whether it's photo, video, AR, or VR or whatever. And we wanted to be part of that journey. We wanted to, in whatever shape or form, we wanted to be there. And the whole team understood it, that it's a great opportunity, and sooner or later we'll figure out a way. How people can come to this kind of visions, I don't know. You probably have to be in the industry for long enough, or just be a user of that industry long enough to understand.
And also see it from a level. And then also see it from a third party point of view, right? That makes sense. Yeah. I don't mean to ask a question you can't answer, but when it comes to your team, like, did you get them to, did they have jobs already, or did they have to forego like an employment opportunity to work with you? Because that's really impressive.
So initially, and as a startup, when you go from sort of one stage, because you progress, you start with something just with a vision. That vision then comes down to a very small problem for a specific niche or audience, and you start solving that. And there are a lot of unknowns, and many people from corporate backgrounds, like top players, they don't know how it works. They're from completely different backgrounds. So you have to, for different stages of your company life, you have to have different teams. So our initial team was more a team of entrepreneurial minded, they had jobs, gigs somewhere, but they were like entrepreneurial driven people. And now that we're developing that, we're growing fast and we're building an international company operating worldwide, then you need more corporate people. You still want to attract them with great vision and wonderful team, but now we are poaching people from corporate backgrounds to join us. In your first day, I think you will struggle big time if you get someone from corporate to join you. It's just not going to work because they are all very, very different backgrounds.
Right. So you're saying during early stages, don't get corporate people, get entrepreneurs.
Entrepreneur or corporate entrepreneurs. That's the whole point. So it's basically in your early stages, he can still, or he or she can still be corporate, but 80% of him has to be, or them has to be entrepreneurial. As you go up, you want more corporate, so they will be 50-50. Then as you go up, you still want a bit of entrepreneur in everyone during your journey. But as your processes mature, as you understand which parts of industry work how. You need people who are very good at executing. They still need to experiment. They still need to grow. They still need to have this be sort of amicable to new ideas. But they need to be more corporate than more corporate than entrepreneurial. Whereas in early stages, you want a bit of structure, but realistically, they need to be ready to pivot and change on a regular basis. Like, I mean, we pivoted many times and regularly, and you can't do that with someone who spent 10 years in a corporate environment where you have strategic plans mapped out for the next 10 years, and you rarely deviate from them. It's very difficult for someone who's been a star performer there to then switch and say, look, for first month we were doing one thing, and now we're in completely different, I mean, we're still in the same vision, but completely different product. How come? They wouldn't be able to do it. They need to be that. And it's a very thin line, and that's the most difficult part, is actually team.
Right. That makes a lot of sense, Roman. So, you mentioned you've pivoted a lot of times. Do you remember the last time you pivoted to what Splento looks like now, or like what Splento is now, and why you've made that decision? Just wanted to get a little bit more insights from you.
It's still, and we will pivot again because the industry is changing really, really fast. If you look how the industry was 150 years ago, then it changed 50 years ago, then it changed again in the 90s, then it changed with the advent of iPhone, and now we're seeing another major shift very soon. So we'll most likely pivot again very soon. Again, the most important thing is that the vision-wise we haven't pivoted. Vision-wise, we are there to capture the world's splendid moments and to help the world move from offline to online, visualizing it. That's it. We have always been there. But the product itself, as the industry is changing, will change along with it. And at the moment, it's just there are, and I think to answer your question is very simple. We look at unit economics, growth rates, velocity of growth, and if we're seeing that something is not delivering the required results, we go slightly different way. Again, the product itself, we have a solution that helps you source your content from, so we can get you a photographer or videographer, we'll edit the photos, we'll deliver them, we'll share them online through our galleries, we'll integrate them into your Word, WordPress, or what have you, we'll have you all the statistics about your usage of photography. But the last big pivot in a sense was that we saw a huge uptake from marketplaces. So in the early 2 years ago, we were doing a lot of events, like we were covering, and we're still doing that. When we pivot, it doesn't mean that we forget about the previous
old product base.
Right. So we just add new product, and we put a lot of effort into promoting that. But yeah, we've been doing loads and loads of events, conferences, trade shows, because our solutions are ideally suited for it. And then we saw that a lot of enterprise customers, like food delivery companies, Airbnb-like listing services, they all need visual content. Mm-hmm. And not just that, because you wouldn't buy any food if it's not photographed. You wouldn't stay in a flat if it's not photographed. And all these companies, they have huge portfolios, and no photographer can do it. One photographer can't. It has to be a company. There has to be one big solution. And so we found a channel of how to sell to them, and we did sort of the pivot in a sense. And you can't call it a big pivot product-wise. It's a focus pivot, sort of tactical. So strategically, again, longer term, we're going exactly the same way. But tactically, instead of concentrating on that, we're putting this on hold, and then we're pivoting into a very good niche, because for the next 2 years, we believe that's going to be the biggest growth factor or driver for growth. So we do that, and then we realize, okay, there is this shift. So it's very important to be able, as you mentioned rightly, to take a look back, sort of step out of the industry and have a look as a third party. What's happening realistically? Where is it going? How is it going to change in the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years? And what can I do to address that?
Right. So when you say pivot, you're not saying, you're changing your product offering or anything like that. It's more about, internally, you guys are changing, like focusing more resources, or like 100% resources on this new niche, on product development, on this new niche, something like this, right?
So it's a difficult question in a sense, because do you remember what was Instagram before? So they were Bourbon. What was Bourbon? What was Bourbon doing before? I don't.
I'm not familiar.
No, but
Unfortunately.
if you look at Uber again, so you can say they pivoted as well many times, but it started initially with limos, and then they pivoted into taxis, then in taxi sharing. Again, the vision is the same: help you to get from A to B. Internally, they pivoted, but it's there. So the good example is Instagram. I think Bourbon was the initial app, something with photo editing in the same way, but then they added the sharing element, and it became whatever it is now. So these are the pivots. Yeah. So if you look at it, so we never did the pivot of we are a financial company and now we're in visual content. No, that's not it. It's we know one niche. We know it's a multi-billion, trillion-dollar niche, and we want to be in it. We know that we're doing it better than others, and it's just pivoting product offerings slightly differently, positioning us slightly differently. So that's what I mean by pivot. But yeah, in a sense, we never were a restaurant restaurant listing service, and then we became photography. In that sense, no, we always been sort of fulfilling our vision. So you have your vision from here to here, and then you go like this, and over time, it just smoothens out.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. So, on a separate note, Roman, like in your email, you told me that your companies and you have attracted tons of high-profile investors and advisors for your companies. And since you've been doing this for a while now, what is the one thing that most investors look out for when deciding if they want to invest or participate? Is it very similar to assembling a team?
It's a very good question, Jeremy. Early stages, it is just you. So it's just the CEO. So in your early stages, probably, and it depends on your growth, how fast you're growing and how fast you're growing revenues, clients, and everyone else. But in the first 1 to 3 years, it will be all about you. You can forget about. It has to be an interesting market, of course. If you are in a market of, I don't know, I can't imagine it. Every market is now big. There are no small markets. But if you are, I can't imagine actually. There is no small market. But if for some strange reason your market is very, very, well, the good market would be physical cameras. So if you're in a market of physical cameras, you probably, doesn't matter how impressive you are, investors won't put money into it because it's all becoming digital. You have to be on that digital wave. But otherwise, so that if your industry is interesting, investors will look only on you as a person. What have you achieved? Have you had experience of running big teams? How good are you at selling your vision? How good is the opportunity? But they will ask for numbers, but realistically, it's just to get an idea that they believe you know the market.
Right. So a lot of it lies in the CEOs or founders' capabilities.
Yeah, purely, exactly. But later on, so slightly, and that's this first stage when you are going after seed. When you probably, you should have at least some product. I don't believe, unless you're in biotech, where you need hundreds of millions to develop something, everything else, even in hardware, you can now do everything with your own money. If you're coming from corporate backgrounds, you can save a few grand to develop something. If you need hardware development of 100K, you can do a crowdfunding campaign or something. So it shouldn't be, your first seed money shouldn't come for an MVP development. You should be able to do it with your minimum viable team. Slightly later, they will start looking at your team. So that will be so the second stage, they will look, okay, have you managed to actually attract big caliber people, sort of people who know what they're doing? And then as you go later, it's all about traction, revenue growth. So it becomes numbers. Still, person is important, but if you look at the journey initially, it's 100% or 99% about the founder and sort of who you are, and a little bit about the industry, because if the industry is shit, no one is going to invest. Then later on, it becomes slightly less founder, more team, and then a little bit more about the industry. And then later on, it splits. And by the time you get to Series B, it's actually all about numbers. It has all about predictability, conversion rates, LTVs, your financial models.
Right, and this is all post-revenue stage, right? You wouldn't suggest people raising money pre-revenue.
No. Post, sorry, someone just came in. I got so this is,
No problem.
Can you repeat your question, Jaron? Sorry. Yeah.
No, so from what you mentioned, it sounds like you should consider fundraising only after you've made your first dollar, or like it should be post revenue.
Not necessarily. No, not necessarily. So you can.
Right.
It depends on the business product. You shouldn't fundraise initially if you don't have a product. So you basically you should have some sort of a demo, because in some cases you would need, I don't know, you would need a bit of money to promote and show the growth. But yeah, you shouldn't come to investors without any product at all. That's so you should be able to show that, look, we've at least developed a minimum viable marketplace. We've done this or that. So yeah. But
right.
Normally, you're right, and it depends, because normally once you have the product, you should be already showing the revenues, because at least some, not necessarily a lot, but some. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool. So let's go back to Splento a little bit. What kind of tactics did you guys do to test out MVPs and ideas? Do you guys run Facebook ad campaigns, or you just go out and talk to people?
Yeah. So definitely, you should always. So there's a good saying by Steve Blank, and if no one, I don't know if you have read Steve Blank's Startup Manual and then 4 Steps to Epiphany, but his motto is get out of the building. Because there is no information inside the building. So every startup owner, startup founder, startup employee should get out of the building. So don't hide behind a computer. Don't hide behind just digital ads. They're important, but you need to go as early as possible, go out and talk to as many people as possible. So you should still run all the campaigns, but you should be out talking to customers, asking very deep questions, understanding what they're solving, how they're solving, and how can you do it better. So we did everything. So we did with pivots, with product pivots. That's the challenge, is that one day you have one channel that works, but if you're going away from B2C, from consumers to B2B, it's a different channel. They're not there where you used to find your B2C clients. Then you go into big enterprise customers, and it's a completely different market again and different approach. So as you can imagine, marketing and sort of attraction in general is not a silver bullet. It's a whole kind of 360. There are loads of things you can do, and different things work for different markets. And yeah, we have a whole framework of how to approach different segments with different products, through different channels with different messages. Right. It's a whole evolved system.
So that's very interesting. I've always been a B2C guy, right? When it comes to marketing, and when it comes to B2B, most of the time, I'm left dumbfounded. How do you market to B2B people? Can you share a little bit of insights on, how you would tackle approaching B2B people with Splento's product, for example?
Yeah. So with B2B, an important thing is that very few of them, you can't acquire any of them on Instagram, or you can't acquire realistically on Facebook. A lot of them, Twitter, so it would be, if you were talking about social media, it's definitely LinkedIn or different groups. The sales cycle is much longer. So with B2C, first of all, client acquisition costs are much lower, and the sales cycle is instant. With B2B, sales cycles are, it could take months and months, and client acquisition costs technically can go over hundreds, if not thousands of pounds or dollars. So with B2B, there are, again, depending on the niche, but you need to start. It's almost like a not necessarily freemium model, but what you're offering is a lot of free advice. It's content driven. A lot of it is content driven. So you create a lot of content that people engage. You are always on top of their minds, and you get to this sort of 4, 5, 6, 10 touches before they convert. So you need to get to them through email marketing, LinkedIn groups, special mail out emails, events. So it's a whole thing. And then after, because we're tracking everything marketing wise, how many. So someone converts, but we know how many touches we had with them through different channels. And the average is very, very high. It's like 7 touches before they convert. So B2B is a lot more evolved thing, a lot harder thing. And they're both hard. It's incorrect to say that the B2C is just as hard. but it's a very different beast, and it involves a lot of moving parts.
Right. So what kind of tools, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, maybe like one of your team members is handling this, but what kind of tools do you guys use to track these touch points?
It's a good question. I've got a marketing team that deals with it, and I should probably know. So we, of course, are very heavy users of Google Analytics, and it's actually very developed. And there are, when you get so there are loads of tools similar to Google Analytics that are easy to use by anyone like me, but we have a good marketing team that is specialist. So Google Analytics became so difficult so fast that only specialists can use it, but actually it has everything you need to know inside of it. So there are a lot of tools on top of that make it easy for people to understand. But if you have a top specialist internally who understands Google Analytics inside out, you can get everything you want, especially if your backend system is synchronized. So our backend, so what you see on our web, you go on Splento.com and you see tip of the iceberg. Realistically, there is that much below it that allows us, like we call it our ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning System, that allows us to see everything from, I don't know, how many photos, videos uploaded in each archive, how fast photographers do it, whether photographer is on way to client or they are late, there are all the red flags. So basically, it's a huge system, but also it's the same with marketing. So we have a system that tells us who viewed which page, how they converted, and so our Google Analytics is synced with that, and we get everything you can imagine about business and clients from that. So there are probably loads of other tools, like niche tools that my team is using that I don't know, but I know that a lot of data is from our internal system plus Google Analytics.
Right. Okay. So thanks for sharing about how you guys use GA and also integrating it with your, I'm assuming, custom built ERP, right?
Yeah, you can call it that. Yeah.
Okay, so cool. So can you think about how, when you just got started, how you got your first customers versus how you get them now most of the time?
So yeah, it would be the case probably for everyone. First customers you'd get through your own network. As in, if you can't sell to your own network, something is wrong. And that's the initial stage. And so if we're talking about the sort of growth of the company, it would be, you need to deliver the MVP with initial revenues from your own customers. Then you probably, second stage would be these customers referring someone, and again, small network, probably did it from SEO, so kind of very straightforward. And of course, you need to be getting, when you're gearing up for Series A or Series B, it has to be advertising and marketing. So big investors, VCs, and a lot of entrepreneurs make a mistake saying that, look, I've built all this amazing client base and all this revenue on the back without spending a penny on marketing. And that is, as an investor, I would say that's the worst thing I could possibly hear, because that means you don't know how to get customers. You can always get to a certain level on the back of virality and on the back of clients referring, but you control it. You cannot control it. I cannot give you 100 million and say, Jeremy, please bring me 500 million in revenue, because you never had to do it, which means as an investor, when I come into your company, Jesus Christ, you have then 6 months or 2 years to figure out how to grow. So you need to, from
already know how to grow.
How to grow, but grow by paying. It doesn't happen. In reality, there's probably 1 or 2 companies who did it. Facebook, okay, maybe Google, maybe, and even them are now spending, of course, money on marketing. But in reality, most of people are not Facebooks or Googles, and the rest of the world, 99.999%, had to spend money on marketing. So you need to understand, or sales, it doesn't matter. So what I'm saying, marketing is about traction channels. So from day one, so if you look at it, company starts with minimum viable team. Then it goes a problem that needs a real solution and that people are paying for this problem. And then realistically, it doesn't actually even start with an idea. It starts with a channel. How are you going to sell? What are you going to do? And then it's in a mix together with a problem. So it all together. Because if you don't know how to sell it, you may have the best team. You may have the biggest problem in the world that your solution is solving. if you don't know how to sell your screws.
Right. So, we hear so many things about, these WeWorks, who spend so much money acquiring customers. And, it turns out the entire business was unsustainable from the get-go. I'm not sure if I'm putting this correctly. There's no way of continue acquiring customers because the customer lifetime value isn't big enough, right?
Yeah.
So what do you have to say, about these things happening?
So there are two things about it. First is, I don't know if you read Reid Hoffman's Blitzscaling book.
Yes, I have that one.
Yeah. So it talks about why they need so much capital and why it's important to scale, and that's the reason why Uber is raising all this money and WeWork raised this money. But also there is probability, and it's basically out of 100 companies, a few will be. They've just done it wrong. They just missed it. So in a sense, I don't know. I haven't looked deeper into WeWork's story, but technically maybe they just got something wrong and it happened. But most companies going through this stage, they know they have the models. They know that we know what the average customer brings us. We know how often they come back within a year. We know our margins on that, and so we can plan and map out and say what's going to happen in 5-10 years time. Whether they got it wrong at the stage of calculations, whether they misled, I don't know. It's difficult to say. You and I weren't in the room where it happened.
Yeah.
But it happens. Unfortunately, it happens, and it's part of the game.
I see. So it's really getting the unit economics right. Your cost per acquisition, your retention rate, your customer lifetime value, repeat rate, etc. before. Okay, that makes sense. Just wanted to validate that because I know a little bit about startups, but since you're in the industry, I wanted to talk to you about it.
Unit economics is mightily important. And again, so there are two interesting things in the world. So startups usually, and again, it's a matter of terminology, but businesses and startups are two different things, at least in my head. Of course, every startup wants to become a business sooner or later, but initially, business, everything is known, and the only thing that is unknown whether you have the capacity to execute it. So you go and open a restaurant, and hey, everything is known. You know how many people, what's the full footfall. All you need to know whether you have the capacity to execute and to make sure that you deliver. With startups, you start off with loads of unknowns. Everything's unknown. You just continue pivoting. And especially in startups, especially in apps, a lot of people know how to drive a lot of customers and how to attract, but they don't know how to monetize. So they know how to scale, but not to monetize. And businesses know how to monetize because it's all known, everything is there, but they haven't got a clue how to really to scale. And ideally, you need to marry the two, and that's when you get the proper unicorns. And when you know how to scale, plus how to make money, which means you really need to know the unit economics. If you know how to attract customers, you know how to grow, but you haven't calculated or miscalculated your unit economics, you're screwed.
Right. I think that's a very interesting view, startups know how to scale, but they don't know how to monetize and then the business part. So the Facebooks and the Googles will be in the middle, right?
So the biggest ones, they know how to do both. Yeah, absolutely. So all the businesses, there are loads of, tennis schools, there are loads of restaurants, there are loads of, standard office buildings, not WeWork style things. There are loads of, photo companies, and they're brilliant. They have positive unit economics from day one, but they haven't got a clue how to scale. And they're happy with that, and they're staying there. There are a lot of startups who we think we know how to iterate quickly. We know how to find customers. We know all this virality. We know all the blah, 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 but they actually don't put the unit economics together to make it work. And those who do, you get Googles, you get Facebooks, you get hopefully Splentos. But yeah.
Right. Thanks for sharing. So, it's about time we need to put this episode to an end. So I have two more questions for you, Roman, before we close this, okay? So I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure you've made mistakes over the years, right? So can you tell me one mistake that, a lesson that you've learned from one of the biggest mistakes you've made in your journey?
There are, so I make a mistake every day, so that's fine. If you're not making mistakes, you're either arrogant enough not to admit it, or you are not experimenting enough, and which both are
bad for business.
Both are so bad that it's terrible. Yeah. So mistakes is something I live, so I'm proven wrong every day. The recent one, the most easier one to deal with, that your listeners can address, is HR problems. So again, mistakes from hiring wrong people, not looking after the bottom line. I don't know. There are loads and loads of stuff. But a very simple thing that came to bite me in the arse recently was sort of not using correct HR procedures to part ways with someone. So when you're a small company, everyone knows each other, and there is no strict HR system. When someone needs to be let go, you just sit down and talk about it, and you say, look, it's not working out, we know it, you know it, it's time to go. And of course, in HR, there is a specific process for that. So it doesn't work. You can't sit down with someone and say, Jeremy, it didn't work out. You actually have to go through KPIs, show all of that. And I got this lesson the hard way a couple of months ago, when I was still in the old mode of sitting down with person, being as open as possible, treating them how I would like to be treated, suggesting ways to improve and where to move, whereas I should have taken a very strict HR approach, saying, these are KPIs, you haven't met them, blah, blah, blah. So the lesson, and it cost us a lot of money and a lot of grief in general, but the idea is, from day one, you maybe don't disregard HR. It will, so if you have to let go of someone, even if it's 3 of you or 6 of you or 20 of you, if you don't have an HR manager, literally just don't do what I've done, is just sit down and be nice and human. Actually, when you're letting go of someone, do it in a HR proper way rather than in a human way. And it has to be HR way.
Right. So it sounds like, you guys faced a lawsuit or something.
Yeah, it's not a lawsuit, no, but it just distracted us completely and utterly for a long, long time. Luckily, it wasn't a lawsuit, but it could have been avoided by really simple, just sitting down saying, look, this is how it's done. But because in the past, I've always done it in a human way. You sit down and talk to people, but here there is a procedure with certain number of meetings and certain recordings of what has happened.
Right. Okay, cool. Thanks for sharing your experience and the lesson that you've learned. So last question before we end this episode. What kind of goals have you set for yourself for Splento?
Personally, or for Splento? For Splento.
Yeah, for Splento, yeah.
Yeah, so for Splento, we want to be the number one sort of visual content provider. When people think about, just like now, when people think about buying something online, they think about Amazon, at least in England and in US. With us, we want to be that very simple. When someone thinks about something visual content related, I need a photographer for my business, I need a videographer, I need someone to edit, I need somewhere to store something visual, I need to recognize images. We want them to think about Splento. So we want to be that Amazon, but of
visual content. Right.
Yeah.
So do you have a set timeline for this, and how would you measure, whether you've hit this goal already?
Yeah. So we definitely haven't hit. We're on the way to there. It will probably take another 5 to 10 years. It's not an easy task. And yeah, so we basically work on. We have our strategic view. We have our 10-year view. Then we go back to 5, then 3, 1 years. Then we break it into monthly sprints. So in a sense, we are more like a corporate now, even though we still call ourselves a startup. But we think if you don't have a longer term strategy, it's very difficult to execute and for the team to know where we're moving. So yeah, we're not there yet. We'll get there within 5 to 10 years. But yeah.
Awesome. So before we end this episode, Roman, is there anything else that you'd like to add on to our audience?
No, just carry on. Again, the main thing is just remember it's the team that matters. It's not the idea. Don't get ideas are worthless. Absolutely, execution is everything. So don't be hung up on ideas. Be hung up on yourself as a team member and the team you attract around you. That's the most important thing.
Awesome. Do you want to promote Splento and what you do so that our audience can check you out as well?
Yeah. So if anyone needs any visual content anywhere around the world, so photographers or videographers, aerial drone photography, literally anywhere, whether you need 1 or 100 photographers, we can provide everything faster and easier and cheaper than anyone else. So that's very easy.
Perfect. Thanks for, Roman, once again, thank you so much for coming onto the show and sharing your journey, your experience with the audience. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of value bombs that they can take away from this episode, okay?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Thanks, man. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
So guys, that's the end of this episode, and I hope that you enjoyed this episode with Roman. I think there are a lot of value bombs in there that startup founders or any entrepreneurs in general can really, really benefit from. But also, I'm always looking to improve this podcast. So I want you to go to www.hustler.com/feedback and let me know what you think about this episode so I can, or what kind of questions you want us to answer so that I will be able to, dig deeper for our future episodes. So that's it, guys. See you guys next week in the next episode. Bye.